that stood out to me as a very YA thing. They don't really think that their parents have an identity outside of just being their parent. Here is the question we are going to try to answer today in this video. Can a 30-something-year-old millennial bookworm read and enjoy a classic cornerstone example of YA fantasy? I want to try book 1 in the Mortal Instruments series, City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. I see these books all the time. I always pick them up from Goodwill or secondhand bookshops when I see them in good condition, because I know these are like classics. Not in like the sense of like classic literature, but like YA fantasy. This is like, it defines that subgenre, if you ask me. And I see it on so many bookshelves. So many people have like a nostalgic feeling for this universe, and so I really want to see what the hype is all about. I always say I don't normally gravitate towards YA, but I am finding myself more intrigued by different books that I see, different synopses that I read. So I do think I'd want to try this and see if I'm too old for the YA. For me, what turns me off to YA is when it is a very impulsive main character, not in charge of their emotions. Their hormones run the show and overrun all sense of rationality. That's something I dislike. And then if it's a kids versus adults thing, or adults just don't understand, because I feel like it is a cheap shot from the author to relate to kids, and I find it kind of creepy. So those are two things that pop up sometimes in YA that make me really dislike it, but I don't think all YA books have that element. So I'm gonna give it a shot. I don't know much about this world or these books, so I just need to dive in. Looking at the cover, I do have to say it's kind of weird that for a YA book, we have this guy's man nips like front and center. That's kind of strange. But what really gives me the wrong tone is looking here. Now, let me zoom in. You can see that this is listed for ages 14 and up, and our main character is 15 years old. So then why does Holly Black blurb this and say it's sexy? I'm sorry, but I don't think we need to market sexy things for a 14-year-old audience about a 15-year-old girl. That is kind of weird. I've been thinking more about the classification of YA books as I'm about to embark on this reading journey, and specifically what I was talking about, how it says this is a sexy series, right? It was a funny, dark, and sexy, one of my favorite books. And, you know, I want to clarify, I do think YA books can have romance in them and even some spice, because at that age, hormones are flaring. This is the age where people start dating. This is what they care about, and I was one of those. I remember reading some spicy scenes in books and loved it. So I don't know if spice level or the presence of spice makes it YA or not YA. I guess the intensity of it could impact it, like how descriptive it is. I think about some of those like darker romances I read and I'm like, holy cow, I don't know if that should be for a 14-year-old. So it's not that I think YA books should have no spice whatsoever. It's just something weirdly creepy about an adult marketing something to a 14-year-old as sexy. It's the marketing of it that just kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. And it comes with the perspective of age and getting older. I mean, look at that song, Stacy's Mom. And if you look at the lyrics as you get older, it's weird. Like when you're younger, it's fun and cutesy, but then it's like, wait a minute. Are we talking about a grown adult, a parent trying to seduce the young kid that's mowing her grass? Maybe she should put some clothes on. Maybe she should set some boundaries. I don't know. It seems kind of like a felony to me. Because I've been thinking so much about the categorization of YA and what makes a book YA, I've been talking to some of my booktube friends about it. So I was chatting with Covers with Cassidy, who I did a live show discussion with. A lot of fun. I'll leave the link for you so you can check out her answering 10 bookish questions and 5 would you rather questions. But after the show, I was asking her about YA, and she said her definition was really around the tone of the book. She said when you're reading a YA, there's a sense that everything is just going to turn out okay. It might not be happy all the time. Bad stuff can still happen, but you know ultimately it will turn out okay. And I was thinking more about that, and I'm like, that makes sense. My Disney heart really likes that. But on the other hand, I'm like, what about cozy fantasy? Because those are clearly adult a lot of times, but you get that same tone. So I don't know if that's really clear to me. But something else she said is that in the plot and the characters, the story really revolves around the kids, and you don't get perspective from a lot of adults, if they're even in the story. It's really about these kids or these teenagers. And that makes a lot of sense, because I was thinking about The Shining by Stephen King, which is written from the perspective of a 5-year-old, but it's not a kid's book. It is clearly an adult book, but you also get the perspective of adults, and there are plenty of adults present throughout the story with the 5-year-old. So I think that might be a good determining factor of a YA book. I was also chatting with the booktube channel Fantasy Awash, and she was telling me that it has to do with the prose, that YA is a lot more simplistic and not too complex or flowery, and that makes a lot of sense too. But then I think of a lot of very basic writing styles in adult literature, and so that one's going to be really hard for me to determine. But I think it makes a lot of sense if you look at the dialogue in particular and the descriptions. Like, they're just going to be, I think, just a lot more simple for the reader. These insights really help me to understand what classifies a book as YA. And honestly, in my opinion, I think it needs to be a balance, because I understand the author should relate to their target audience, and they need to capture those emotions and feelings that those readers can relate to, right? So I understand that those might not be the same emotions and feelings that I myself have as a 30-something-year-old adult. But the balance really comes in because I don't think the author should be condescending or insulting, assuming that younger readers wouldn't understand more complex emotions, feelings, plots, and prose. So that is kind of the attitude I have going into this read. I'm still really confused what classifies a book as YA. So I don't know. I really want to hear from you guys in the comments down below how you think a YA is classified. I was at the bookstore one time and I was asking why ACOTAR was in the teen section, and they said it was because the main character starts out the series as being 19 years old. I don't think that's a good classification. I just do a hard pass on that one, in my opinion, because I don't think ACOTAR is a teen book. Like, it's just not. So yeah, there's a lot of other thoughts on this, and I'm thinking it's not a formulaic response. I think it's a balance of a lot of different things, but I don't think we have to classify things into age groups. Like, it's getting kind of ridiculous with YA, new adult. Why can't people enjoy just a wide variety? You look at classics, which were written and published before we had all these classifications and distinguishing factors, and there were no age ranges. I mean, required reading when I was in school was like classic literature, and it wasn't kind of broken down that way as YA or not. So I think we can enjoy a lot of different things as readers. I don't think we need to put ourselves in a box. So anyways, I'm still going to mull all this over while I start the read of these books. So I think what I'm going to do, I'll start the B-roll footage of reading book 1, which matches my shirt. I didn't even mean to do that, but I like a good theme. So I'm going to start reading this. While I play the B-roll for you of me reading this book, I'll do a voiceover of the plot summary on the inside flap. So if you don't want to know that, you can just mute me until I come back to this like face-to-face format. I know some people don't like to know the summary on the book because they consider that spoilers. So just mute me if you don't want to hear what the book is about, but I will come back and give you spoiler-free reactions to it. When 15-year-old Clary Frey heads to the Pandemonium Club in New York City, she hardly expects to witness a murder, much less a murder committed by 3 teenagers covered with strange tattoos and brandishing bizarre weapons. Then the body disappears into thin air. This is Clary's first meeting with the Shadow Hunters, warriors dedicated to ridding the earth of demons. It's also her first encounter with Jace, a shadow hunter who looks a little like an angel and acts a lot like a jerk. Within 24 hours, Clary is pulled into Jace's world with a vengeance when her mother disappears and Clary finds herself attacked by a demon. But why would demons be interested in ordinary mundanes like Clary and her mother? And how did Clary suddenly get the sight? the Shadowhunters would like to know. Exotic and gritty, exhilarating and utterly gripping, Cassandra Clare's ferociously entertaining fantasy takes readers on a wild ride that they will never want to end. I'm back now that I finished City of Bones, which is book 1 in the Mortal Instruments series, and I am here to give you my spoiler-free reaction to this book, focusing on YA elements and if a 30-something-year-old bookworm can enjoy a YA fantasy. Firstly, the plot was very fast-paced, engaging, with lots of twists. The characters were snarky and relatable. There was even an element of competition among females that I liked, where one female is just used to being the center of attention around the guys and doesn't know how to adjust when a new female comes in and could be a potential new friend. So I liked the different elements of relatability among the characters. Our main character, Clary, did have impulsive moments, like I mentioned, something that kind of grates my nerves about YA, how she's like, my mom is missing, I have to find her, so I'm gonna jump into this portal even though I have no idea what a portal is or where it leads or what I'm doing. And I'm like, girl, slow down, think, control your emotions, be a little bit more strategic, but no, she just has to jump right into it because she's determined to find her mother. But that was a very minor thing for me because what was more important is that I loved that we had a strong parent-child relationship. I love that even though she kind of has friction with her mom because she's a teenager and wants to go out and do things, she still loves her mom loves her, so having that strong mother-daughter relationship is something that I really enjoyed. So you jump into that portal, girl. City of Bones does something that I love in fantasies, and that's when we have a human character who is discovering this fantasy world for the first time. So we are learning about it along with them. That's something I really like. I find really approachable for learning about fantasy worlds. What was interesting about this journey, though, is that Clary was weirdly calm and accepting of a lot of things like demon hunters, but then she really rejected the idea that her mother could have been keeping a secret from her from all this time. And that stood out to me as a very YA thing, not necessarily just in books, but just younger adults in general, is that they don't really think that their parents have an identity outside of just being their parent. It's like they don't really think that their parents had a life before them, or like they don't do anything, don't have any hobbies or interests outside of just being their mom or dad. So that's not annoying. I find that kind of charming and endearing that they think that they're like the center of these parents' world. But Clary had a really tough time with the idea that her mom could have been keeping secrets from her. And it's like, look, whether it's a parent-child relationship, a romantic relationship, a platonic relationship, you are not entitled to all the truth of someone's life. I don't think that. But it was something that really stood out to me because Clary was having a really tough time with the idea that her mom could keep secrets and did keep secrets. And she really rejected that and pushed back against it. And I'm like, but you see all this supernatural stuff going on, so it would seem reasonable that Mommy Dearest would keep this hidden and away from you so you could live a normal life. Like, to me, if I was a kid and I heard that, I'd be like, okay, I get it. Now I know, moving on. But Clary had a difficult time with this, and that stood out to me, like I said again, as something very YA. Something else that is a stereotypical characteristic of YA books, regardless if they're fantasy or romance or whatever, is a love triangle. And I was disappointed to see that we have a love triangle brewing already in City of Bones, where, Clary is just a hot commodity. All the guys want her. Okay, well, two guys want her. And so that was disappointing to see, but not the biggest deal. I mean, if you look at love triangles in the form of like the Twilight saga, that was a big deal. I think YA readers really enjoy that, so that's probably why it's stereotypical. Back to what I was thinking about with the different criteria of what makes a book YA, one of the points was to consider the writing style. Now, the vocabulary in this wasn't very robust, it was very approachable, but I didn't think that it was dumbed down at all, and the dialogue wasn't too bad until one of our characters gets a little bit upset. So on page 405, Clary says, "Oh, I beg to differ. I think he was clearly evil. All that stuff he was spouting about keeping the human race pure and the importance of untainted blood, He was like one of those creepy white power guys, and you two totally fell for it. Okay, that dialogue is a little bit juvenile, especially with the, and like, as a filler word. So that was the only time that it really stood out to me. Otherwise, I have no notes on the writing style. I think it was fine, but I can see that it was just a little bit more basic. The other possible criteria about the story revolving around teenagers was true. However, there was a strong presence of various adults, lots of dialogue with adults, lots of insight from them. And what I liked, though, is that there were various relationship types. So you definitely see the teenagers pushing back against adults because they want to be their own person, have their own identity, be responsible for themselves. So that was there, so I think that would be relatable to YA readers, but it wasn't overdone or on the point of being obnoxious. I mentioned there was a good mother-daughter relationship. There are plenty other relationships where there is a balance of respect. So I really enjoyed that. And then it was kind of funny because on page, 231, Clary is talking to this adult who I will leave nameless so that I don't spoil anything. But she says, "I don't want to have to wait. All my life I felt like there was something wrong with me, something missing or damaged. Now I know." I didn't damage you. Every teenager in the world feels like that, feels broken or out of place, different somehow. Royalty mistakenly born into a family of peasants. The difference in your case is that it's true. You are different. Maybe not better, but different. And it's no picnic being different. So I thought it was kind of entertaining how an adult is saying, all teenagers feel the way you do. Not good or bad, I just thought it was interesting. Reading that as an adult, I really kind of giggled at. I think reading it as a YA reader, it would have been kind of nice. I don't know if I would have related to it, but I think there's a lot of comfort at any age. I don't think it's restricted to teenagers or YA, but there's a lot of comfort in knowing that you're not the only one that feels a certain way. So I like that. I think that might be kind of a relatability I was talking about, how authors can relate to YA readers. I'm not sure. I enjoyed that. It stuck out to me. To address the question, can a 30-something-year-old reader enjoy YA fantasy? So far, the answer is yes. I enjoyed this. The plot was fast-moving. There's lots going on. There's lots of magic and elements. There's vampires and werewolves and demon hunters and portals and so many different dynamics between our characters. I am really, really enjoying this. So I am going to pick up book 2 and we will continue our review of what is YA. back now that I have finished the YA fantasy trilogy, but before I dive into my thoughts on these specific books, I had some updated thoughts after talking to my friend, the booktube channel Rodgers Reads. During a live show discussion, I asked him how he classifies a book as YA. And in our discussion, he was saying that he thinks it has to do with the age of the protagonist. And also, it's more light on the themes. It's a more contained story, like a fun, rompy adventure that can make it a fun break from these heavier fantasies that he reads. And I asked him, I said, well, is it really the age of the protagonist? Because there's plenty of adult stories that have a younger character. So if the main character is 17 years old, does that automatically mean the book is YA? And he had a very interesting point that I'm going to be carrying with me for observations. He said that there is clearly a bias in publishing, that if you have a younger female protagonist, that is typically marketed as YA, whereas if it's a younger male protagonist, it is not marketed as YA. And I thought that was a really interesting point that I'm still kind of digesting and want to think more about, but it's worth mentioning that the main character in this trilogy is Clary, who is a female. And we get perspective from other guys, young men in the series that are the same age as her, but she is clearly the main character. So, interesting to consider that point. Kicking off book 2, there is a main character who's really lashing out because their whole life was a lie, and it was very juvenile, not in control of their emotions, really acting out. But I guess given this situation, I don't know if I would have acted much differently. It was a pain to read, but I think it kind of makes sense. So I'm gonna give it a pass on that. But there was this quote on page 44 that I really liked. I'm gonna leave out the names because I don't want to spoil who's having this conversation. I don't want to ruin anything for you. So there's just people having a conversation. So-and-so is an adult. They shouldn't need reassurance from me. Oh, come on. You can't wait for perfect behavior from everyone. Adults screw up too. Go back to the institute and talk to them rationally. Be an adult. I don't want to be an adult. I want to be an angst-ridden teenager who can't confront their own inner demons and take it out verbally on other people instead. Well, you're doing a fantastic job. I like that scene because I like pointing out that adults are human too, and they make mistakes, and you can talk to them rationally about it and deal with your emotions in another way. So I kind of like that call out, and this is what I mean when I say I kind of like the interaction in this series between the teenagers and the adults. My frustration with our main character, Clary, really increased in this one because she is such a liability. So as I mentioned in book 1, I was enjoying that she was human and learning about this whole new magical world, and we're learning about it alongside her. And I liked that there. But here she is such a liability because she insists on going everywhere with everyone and doing things with them, but she has no training. She has no education in this world. And so it's so selfish because they have to look out for her, and that distracts them from the danger that's in front of them. And it's so just self-centered that it really, really bugged me that she thought she had a right to go with them and was very whiny about it. In book 2, there was an element with an Inquisitor, which really gave me the vibes of Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter, and it drove me nuts. That's the kind of adult thing that I don't like, but I mean, that can go in a lot of other books. Adult books can have this too, so I guess it's not YA versus adults, but just this, she doesn't believe the teenagers. She thinks she knows what's right. She wants to torture them and put them in bad situations, like Dolores Umbridge. Definitely gave me those frustrating vibes. So I don't think the Inquisitor element was really a teenagers versus adults kind of thing. I think you can have that annoying law figure in any age group of books. So that was just that storyline, and it triggered me from Dolores Umbridge. But something that was absolutely YA and made me kind of roll my eyes at how juvenile it was. So we have our villain doing their villain monologue, right, which all villains tend to do. And there's a group of people, and one of the teenagers has to yell out, "He's a bastard and he's a dickhead." And I'm like, okay, oh, you got him there. Shh. honey, the adults are speaking. Sit down. It was just like so ridiculously silly. But I did enjoy it overall. This was a good journey. And so I went straight from book 2 over to book 3. Thinking about it objectively, maybe I was feeling a little bit of burnout reading these back to back and trying to get through them kind of quickly. But my frustration with Clary definitely continued in this one. How she feels like she belongs in this Shadowhunter world. She feels like she just belongs in this world because of her bloodline, but it's like, again, no training, no education. So when people are saying that she shouldn't come with them, I agree with them, and she's just being a little brat, not wanting to accept it, and that was so frustrating to me because she put so many other people in danger because she was being impulsive and just didn't want to be left out. And it was really funny because on page 42, she does something pretty dumb and Luke is giving her a little talking to. And so Clary looked at him with her mouth open. Luke, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. You didn't know anything about Idris. You don't even care about Idris. You were just upset about being left behind, like a child, and you had a tantrum. And now we're here, lost and freezing and... Come on, let's start walking. So again, I like this interaction with the adults. They're not letting these kids get away with just everything, but it's still like a relationship of respect. They're not talking down to them. They're just calling them out for being dumb. And I was right there with him because she was being dumb. And there's a scene later on where someone is yelling at Clary and they're calling her rash and selfish. And I am just like, yes, she is thoughtless. Thank you so much for someone calling her out on it because that is absolutely true. She just has that like 16-year-old stereotypical mentality of, I know everything. And no, you don't, especially if you're comparing her with other 16-year-olds that have more training and education in this area. Like, she just got introduced to this magical world. She needs to calm down and listen to people. Those are my reactions from books 2 and 3. So wrapping up the series overall, I'd have to say that the plot was really engaging, kept me turning the page, kept me picking up the next book. The world building was super interesting. I loved all the magic, the different creatures, the elements of it. Even the tone was kind of nice because reflecting back on what some of my booktube friends have said, there was kind of a lighter tone and it was more of, you knew everything was going to turn out okay. That point that I made earlier, and it wasn't happy all the time, and not everybody lives, and that sucks. But there was an element of like coming together and teamwork and found family, which I mean was kind of watered down, but it was there. So the tone was pretty nice. So plot, world building, tone, I would all rate 5 stars. What really drops my overall rating of this trilogy is the characters. Obviously, I found Clary frustrating. I also found Jace frustrating with his like forced sarcasm. That makes me think that he would grow up to be like one of those frat boys. It's like super obnoxious and in your face. So I didn't like 2 of our main characters, and so that really brought things down. But I was thinking back on it, and I don't think that has to do with them being teenage characters. I don't think it has to do with these books being YA, because if I think about like really smutty, dark romance, I often get frustrated with the female main characters as well, or the male love interest. So this is just a matter of these characters just not being my favorites. Another element that drags down my overall score of The Mortal Instruments, books 1 through 3, was the conflict keeping our love interests apart. Now, this was spoiled for me, and so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I was prepared for it, I knew how it was going to go, and so I knew I could keep reading it, but it was so overdone. It lasted through all 3 books, and it was just so overdone. And it took the emphasis away from the fantasy. This really read more like a romance with a subplot of fantasy rather than a fantasy with a subplot of romance. Again, there's lots of like serious things going on in this world, and yet our characters are focused so much on the romance element of it, which seems kind of like skewed priorities. In the earlier points of what makes a book YA, absolutely, it did focus around the teenagers and their story, their emotions, but there were adults present. There were great relationships. It was not an adults versus kids kind of vibe, which I've mentioned is a cheap shot way for authors to relate to teenagers, in my opinion. So great, respectful relationships, but it did center around the teenagers. The prose or the writing style was very basic and to the point, so that also fits with the theories that I expressed earlier, although I did feel it was a little bit condescending at times, but overall it wasn't bad. I would say it was just basic and to the point. The dialogue wasn't too cringeworthy. There were moments, but it all washed out okay. So I think all the points that my booktube friends have made of what makes a book YA are really solid points to consider. I don't know if there's like a blanket way to define them, but to answer the question, can a 30-something-year-old book lover read and enjoy YA fantasy? The answer is yes. I did enjoy myself. Is it an all-time favorite? No, probably not. But I think I will continue in the series. I enjoyed the journey. I think it's a great way to break things up if I'm reading some heavier fantasy that has like the world is ending, everybody's dying, really heavy, tough themes going on. I think that this is lighter and kind of breaks things up while just being really entertaining. It was a really entertaining journey. So I'm glad that I kept an open mind with it. And now I can say that I like YA fantasy. So, thank you so much for hanging out with me in this journey. Please leave comments down below about what you think is a YA definition. I'm really curious to know. I also want to know if you have a favorite YA series that you think adults, I still feel like a kid. If you know of a YA fantasy book or series that you think a 30-something-year-old would enjoy, something that holds up, stands the test of time, please drop those suggestions down below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time.